Thanks for joining us here on WBCC and FloridaToday.com. I'm Matt Reed, and today we put Palm Bay under our microscope. You'd be hard-pressed to find a more ambitious city than Palm Bay. It's Brevard County's most populous city, and City Hall has made headlines in the past year for, on one hand, taking a huge financial hit in property taxes during the real estate slump, and on the other hand, continuing to float creative ideas such as a new minor league baseball stadium, a new expressway around the city, an ambitious bike system, and even a corps of paragliding cops. Joining me today is the man with a hand in nearly everything I just mentioned, Palm Bay City Manager Lee Feldman. Lee, thanks for joining us here today in the studios.
Thanks for having me out.
I want to start off with some general information. What is the population of Palm Bay today, and how do I get to downtown?
Well, we estimate population to be about 106,000 people, slightly down from last year by a couple hundred. How do you get to our downtown? You come to one of the many different activity centers that we have. We don't have a traditional downtown like some cities, but because we are 100 square miles in size, we have activity centers, whether they're the Babcock Street corridor or Malabar Road, Minton Road, Palm Bay Road, US 1. There's always something to do.
Recent analysis by the property appraiser showed Palm Bay's tax roll was hit hardest of all Brevard cities, down 20% from 2008, dropping from about, I think, $5 billion to $4 billion. And on May 12th, city voters rejected a referendum that would have raised property taxes to fix roads, repair drainage problems, and fund economic development grants for local businesses. Lee, what does that mean to local cities and residents going forward in the next year or so?
Well, part of this is economy driven. I mean, we all know that we're in a recession, and the real estate market has dropped. And the city, being a high growth city, as other high growth cities around the country and in the state, are going to feel the brunt of that in terms of property tax. A lot of our property tax came from vacant property. Since the market has dropped there, those assessments have fallen, and subsequently we will have less revenue to accomplish our mission.
Vacant property meaning new development or businesses that had not been occupied, or?
No, actually vacant raw land.
Oh, I see, okay.
Yeah, Palm Bay is still a GDC community, and we have roughly 25,000 undeveloped lots. And so when the market was good, the value of raw land was high, and when the market's bad, the value of raw land is low.
Got it. Well, keep that in mind. You told Florida Today, quote, "I think we are beyond doing more with less. I think we are going to be doing less with less." In terms of services then, if I'm a resident of Palm Bay, do things stay the same? Have you been making cuts? What's been going on?
Well, historically, as we've been charged by our citizens, we try to be as efficient as we can. We try to take on more activities year in and year out without raising taxes and fees or increasing manpower to accomplish those. That is the doing more with less. More demands from our citizens, trying to do it in a more economical fashion. I think local government, not only in Palm Bay, elsewhere in Brevard County and in the state and the nation, are now at a point where we have to look at doing less with less. We have less resources, and we just can't take on more functions. And perhaps now we have to start giving up some of the traditional government functions. What those are, that'll be up ultimately to the City Council and to the citizens to help determine.
Okay. Well, enough of the gloom and doom there, Lee. Despite the current climate, big ideas keep coming from Palm Bay's leaders. Mayor John Mazziotti, for example, has proposed a privately funded stadium for baseball and has said he has had informal talks with representatives of an existing team, which he's refused to identify. But as it happens, the Brevard Manatees, who play at Space Coast Stadium in Viera, are the only team in the Florida State League currently able to move, according to League President Chuck Murphy. Lee, I know that you aren't the driving force behind the baseball stadium, but it's been in the headlines this week. Where did this idea come from, and what is the status of it?
Well, sports venues have generally been used as economic catalysts, and I believe the mayor's concept is that can we put a sports complex somewhere in the city to help spur the economic development around that area, wherever that area may be. The mayor's asked to put together a think group of some citizens and business leaders, and he's in the process of formulating that right now. And there will really be 4 charges to that group. First, to determine whether there is a market feasibility. Is there a team that can be located here? Is there a way to support a stadium? The second is, where could you potentially put that? The third is, what is the financial viability? Even if you have a team, there are many other aspects to a stadium that you have to measure in terms of financial viability. Mm-hmm. And then the fourth is there both citizen and corporate support for such an effort? Those would be the 4 questions that are ultimately charged to this committee to try to vet out and to come to some conclusion on. If the answer is yes to all 4 of those, that there is a team out there, that it is financially viable, that there is land available, and that the public and the corporate sponsors are out there, then it becomes a potentially viable idea.
So you're talking about private money to build something like this?
That's in the Palm Bay model. It would all have to be private money.
Brian McCallum, a Florida Today reporter, reported this week that something like this could work as part of a larger retail and entertainment center. Is that something that that the city is looking at?
Well, again, that'll be part of the viability analysis that's done. Some entities have put stadiums right in their heart of redevelopment areas. I'm not sure we have the land available to do that. The other is, can this be situated so that there is a good spin-off effect? Because a stadium just cannot sit by itself. If it sits by itself, it won't have any of that economic drive, and it will just be another field.
Okay. Well, a huge development on Palm Bay's southern edge appears to be moving forward and primed for construction in 2012. The developments would cover about 1,662 acres west and east of Interstate 95 between Grant and Micco Roads near an interchange. Plans call for the projects to include 3,760 housing units as of now, 570,000 square feet of retail space, and that's when it's fully built out in 2021. Under the proposals, both projects would retain 30% of the property for, quote, natural and managed open conservation areas, unquote. Lee, what is the status of that project? That's something that seems counterintuitive, that something this big would be coming along at a time when the real estate market is so depressed.
Well, actually, it's quite intuitive, not counterintuitive, because this is the time to do good planning and to set the framework. We all know that there will be an economic recovery. We just don't know when. And so if we can be doing the planning now on this parcel of land to build a sustainable community, an area that has a downtown, that has a grid system.
A baseball stadium?
That potentially has mobility, has places for people who live there to actually work there and to really build a community. If we can lay all that groundwork now, when the economy comes back, we will be ahead of the game in terms of being suited to put that there. We call it the Emerald City.
The Emerald City.
And we call it the Emerald City because there's a move now for communities to be green. We wanted to take green to the next step.
You mentioned something interesting to me in an earlier meeting, and that was that some city leaders and the people behind the development flew to a special planning conference in, I believe it was Arizona?
Yeah, we did. About, actually during the, right as the Mother's Day fires took place in Palm Bay, we were out in Arizona at a group called the Decision Theater, which was able to physically take some representations of projects and put some computer models with it, and you were able to determine, well, what if we add this component? What will that do to the overall community? So we were out there looking at whether we were going to use the Decision Theater as a planning tool or not.
Great. Well, here's one that stands to affect everyone in southern Brevard if it ever becomes a reality: the St. John's Heritage Parkway. Take a look at this map. The long-planned, long-hoped-for roadway would connect in far southern Brevard near Micco Road and I-95, skirt around the west of Palm Bay, and connect north of the city to a roadway west of Melbourne, possibly O'Galley Boulevard. The estimated cost for the 19 miles of the project in the Palm Bay area currently comes in at about $110 million to $130 million. Did I get that right, Lee? And where does that project stand?
Well, the project is moving along. We've probably made more progress in the last 3 or 4 years than we made in the last 15 years. The Parkway is a much needed road. Right now, the only north-south arteries in Brevard County are I-95, US 1, and Wickham. Babcock to some degree, but it ends up at Fee Avenue. And in order to have better mobility, we need to be able to put a system in that can take people from the south part of the county and move them in another fashion to the north part. In Palm Bay, we need better evacuation routes, which the Parkway will serve, and we need some better mobility as we start looking at developing the western side of our city. To do that, we need to have a roadway system. So we are working with the developers, such as those in the Emerald City that we just talked about acquiring the right-of-way and starting to plan the actual path of this road, the Palm Bay Parkway, or when you get outside the city, the St. John's Parkway, to make it a system that's going to work for the benefit of all.
I know Palm Bay bought about 160 acres the last time I think we wrote about it, and that was a pretty substantial amount of land for right-of-way, but it's still a small portion. How does the city plan to assemble the rest of this land? Is it a county effort as well, or is it?
It's going to be both city, county, and state. Where we have developers, such as Emerald City, and then to the west of there, Cypress and Waterstone, and the Machada property in the Satori, as a condition of their development, they will have to dedicate the right-of-way necessary for the Parkway. It gets into the area that's already in the pre-platted as we get into the area of the compound, all the way up north to Malabar Road, that we actually have to worry about purchasing right-of-way. One of those that we will be approaching is St. John's River Water Management District that owns some land, and try to acquire some title to that as well.
I believe it was Andy Anderson, the county commissioner, who mentioned, or his office mentioned, that the county has millions of dollars sort of waiting for this project. Is that true?
They have about $21 million last time I checked from local option gas tax bonds that they are working on for right-of-way acquisition from pretty much I-95 and Ellis Road south to the city line.
Okay. Well, Lee, one of the other ideas, to shift gears a little bit, that you raised, and I thought it was an interesting one, is one that could improve the quality of life and appearance of Palm Bay, and that is something to do with canals through the city and the potential for trails along them. Why don't you tell me what that's about?
Sure. I mean, if you look at the city of Palm Bay's grid right now, it's not a typical north, south, east, west grid. We have a lot of cul-de-sacs, a lot of roads that just wind in and out of the city for whatever reason. That's how communities were planned back in the 1950s and 60s as suburbs started to expand. We know now that road patterns like that don't work. They don't make for a very livable community. But in Palm Bay, we can't rip up roads and homes and put a traditional grid system. So we're looking right now at trying to work with the Melbourne-Tillman Water Control District about taking their grid system, which does run north-south and east to west, and start looking at creating pedestrian accesses so that we can create some more mobility for our citizens in the community. We all have to get away from use of the car every day. And if we can create better ways of moving pedestrian traffic, the canals may be a solution for us.
I checked our archive, and the City Council discussed the idea last October, and at the time, Councilman Pat Woodard said, quote, "We need to make ourselves more commuter-friendly, but in past years, when we've tried to do canal paths, homeowners have had security concerns." How big a concern is security along something like this, and are there any other barriers to such a project?
Well, I think the security issue is more perceived than reality, but we're going to have to work with the homeowners and make sure that we address their concerns. The last thing we want are people traipsing through their backyards, but there are cities and counties across the country that have been able to design good canal systems and accommodate those security concerns.
The Metropolitan Planning Organization, again back last year, projected that a Palm Bay bikeway could cost anywhere from $100,000 a mile to $500,000 per mile. And that means, under one of the ideas, that if the path are 23 miles, it could cost about $2.3 million to build a bike path. Is that about right?
I'm not familiar with the MPO's numbers and where they get them. I find in this business that engineers can over-design projects in cost, but a lot depends where the funding comes from. If the funding comes from a federal level, there are usually more hoops that you have to jump through in terms of designs and studies and so forth to go through, which raise the price. If we don't use federal money and we use perhaps the reserves that the Melbourne-Tillman Water Control District has, I think we'll be able to do it much cheaper.
Tell me a little about those reserves. That's a district that probably not a lot of people know about, but they seem to have a lot of control over water and a bit of money.
Well, they do. The district was created back before there were cities. It was a way of draining the agricultural land. They are a dependent district of the county. They are in charge. They are charged with maintaining the canals for the major canals, such as the Melbourne-Tillman, or what we call the C1. In our city, West Melbourne, and a portion of unincorporated Brevard. They've been, because they've had some sales of land over the year, they've been able to amass quite a reserve out there. We would like to see them ultimately use some of their reserve money to build out those trails and meet another role of their mission.
So a little bit better bike access, perhaps, leading from Bayside Lakes all the way to Harris?
Not necessarily bike access, but people access. You know, bike trails are often thought of as recreational. What we're trying to look at is, can we create another system of mobility, not for people to go out and recreate, but for people to be able to get to the commerce areas, to be able to shop, and get back without necessarily having to use the vehicle each time.
Well, let's talk about Palm Bay's paragliding cops. Earlier this year, Palm Bay Police announced the formation of a part-time corps of paragliding police officers who could use the craft for search and rescue, among other things. Take a look.
And I've been in law enforcement for 24 years. There's another lieutenant on the police department, Mark Rankins, who flies recreational with me as well. And the more we started flying, the more application we saw for law enforcement purposes. And we presented it to the chief, city manager, and city council, and our city staff is progressive enough to look at this and say we believe there's application here, and allowed us the opportunity to start this pilot project to see if this is a usable application for law enforcement.
Lee, what's the status of that group? Have they flown any missions? Have they... What's happened?
Actually, they are now finalizing the equipment. They were out the other day on a homicide scene looking for a vehicle from the air, as well as taking pictures of the crime scene for our crime scene techs. This is a system that shouldn't cost us any money in the end. The equipment is donated at this point. If there is a cost, it will be absorbed by our law enforcement trust fund, which is forfeiture money that we take bad people's money and put it to law enforcement use, and so there are no direct tax dollars that are involved. The idea is that you know, we have 100 square miles to cover, and while the sheriff does a great job with providing us with aerial support through the helicopter system, sometimes we need a little bit more. We need longer, prolonged search and rescue capability, or sometimes just high patrol. If we know that we have an area that's being inundated with burglaries, we may put the paraglider up there and be monitoring for types of traffic into the neighborhoods.
Well, that's our program. I want to thank Palm Bay City Manager Lee Feldman for joining us here at One Gannett Plaza. Want to hope to see you next week here at WBCC and FloridaToday.com, or check out our past programs on demand at FloridaToday.com. I'm your host, Matt Reed. We'll see you next week.